So we're going to start this one just like the last one. We're going to make an egg base out of 10mm EVA foam. Trace whatever pattern you have onto the foam and cut it out. In this case, I'm going to make my pattern 7 times. And remember to make a mark on one end of each piece so that you can keep that orientation the same. And then we're going to cut it out with a brand new super sharp exacto blade. Next, we're headed over to my stovetop to preform the pieces. I think this step isn't 100% necessary, but it does help a lot with the glue up. Just slowly heat up one half of the piece at a time. Take your time, and then once the foam is heated through, you can stretch it and form it over some kind of something, whatever you got. I'm using a 2x4 in this case, but really anything you have that works is fine. Now be careful during this stage. I'm warning you, the foam is extremely hot. I have pretty tough hands. I'm not showing it on camera, but I'm in a lot of pain over here. After that's all done, we're going to add contact cement to the edge of each piece and wait for it to lose its tackiness. Basically just follow the instructions on whatever glue you're using. Then smush it all together, making sure those marks you made in the beginning end up on the same side of the egg. Now the last piece is a little bit tricky because you have to set up and line up one side while simultaneously keeping the other sides from touching anything at all. To do this, I found it was really helpful to fold the egg inside of itself just a little bit, offsetting those two ends while I work. Once you're done, it should have a pretty good seal and kind of sound like an inflated basketball. If it's a little bit wonky or misshapen, just take it back to the stove, heat it up slowly, and you can form it back into the shape that you want. So I did a bunch of swatches. There you go. Option 1. Option 2. And option 3. And I think this is the one we're going to go with. This is the one I like. So we're going to make a bunch of these. But first, we got to do some layout. Whew. Okay, so lots of measuring later. I've got everything laid out. I decided on a division of 16, so that leaves a good amount of space for the scales here. What I feel is a good size, and then they don't get too small at the ends. See, like this? So that's what it'll end up as. So we'll start here. So I started with just capping it with a circle of leather, and then I'm starting to lay out the scales and put them in as rows of 8. So it'll go out rows of 8 for a while, and then it'll transform into 16, I think, maybe later, like right here. We'll see how it goes. So all the red lines are going to be the width of the scales. So I have that measurement, and then based on this guy, I like the shape and the proportions of this, so we're going to use that to make the scales for this. So these scales are 4.5 by 6. Those are millimeters. So based on that relationship, we can figure out how big these are supposed to be. So if at this spot, if I'm going to put a scale right there, it's 5 wide, then that means that you do some math and you figure out how tall it's supposed to be, and everything stays in proportion, and you're scaling this exact shape all the way up. You don't necessarily have to go to those lengths to make it that precise or accurate. You can just wing it, but that's what I'm doing. It takes a little bit more time, a little bit of measuring, but we'll keep everything in line that way. Then the other thing to do as you're going along, so I have this one set for my next row. I'm going to find where it starts and where it ends, and then I'm going to measure and make a line all the way around, a concentric circle, so I keep my line straight as we go across the egg, because you don't want to end up kind of in the middle and have that line of scales kind of being all skewampus and weird. So keeping those perpendicular to these longitude lines is not crucial, but you should do it. So we'll keep on going with that. We've got a plan together. Now the only thing left to do is to actually do it. So let's get to work. Using ruler, lay out your scales in a straight line on the back of your material, whatever material you may be using. I'm using leather in this case. You don't have to do that. You can use whatever you want. Okay, so I want you to take your time and make all the scales as uniform in size and shape as you can for each row, no matter what shape you've decided on. Look online for lots of different dragon scales, shapes, and patterns. I've linked some of my favorite down below. As you're gluing the next row of scales down, for the pattern I'm following that is, it's important that the new row of scales is centered to the offset and that it's oriented to point at the apex of the egg. So quick tip for hot glue, to avoid spider webs all over your shop and all over your nice new egg that you just made, you're going to lay down your glue, then let go of the trigger, that's important, then we're going to wipe off the excess before we lift the glue gun away from the material. This small step will save a lot of time and leave a much better finished aesthetic. So we're on to the next row. Let me show you. I'm pretty much in the flat part of the egg, kind of the middle band where there's not much going on, it's kind of just flat. So this row, the center of the scales is hitting on the line. The next row, the scales will be in between the lines. So all I have to do to find out the size of the next one is measure from this line to this line, and that is the width of my next scale. That's the widest point. So then I take that measurement, which is, let's figure it out because I haven't done this yet. It's 4.5, but I always check a couple of them because I didn't do this perfectly. Like that one's 4.5, that one's 4.2, that one's 3.9, 4.2. So we can just say 4.2. That's a good measurement. Again, based on this guy and the proportions of this scale, I want to be able to scale this shape and keep that consistent. So we're going to take the width, which is 4.2, and I'm going to multiply it by 1.5, and that'll give me 6.3. So my next scale needs to be 4.3 wide, and then from the tip all the way to the top of it is supposed to be 6.3. So then, half that right here, where these arches are supposed to meet, is supposed to be at 3.15, if that makes sense. So a little bit of measuring, a little bit of math, lay it all out. I'm going to draw that to that size on the leather, cut it out, and then use that as a stencil because those are really hard measurements to kind of take across with a ruler. So I'll just use that as a stencil and draw out 16 of them and then glue them down and then keep going like that. So you go up, measure the width, and then figure the rest of it out. Crucial thing with that, which I didn't do the best job at it, but I did my best. Well, actually I didn't do my best because then it'd be perfect. But I tried a little bit, just a little bit, to make these lines as even as possible, as much the same as I could around the sphere. So what I did, I took a piece of string and I went from center to center and made that as straight as I could, then drew a line. So they're pretty close. Use it as a rough guide, not as an exact match. If that makes sense. It kind of looks like a watermelon. Look at that. Once I have my template, I'm going to do the layout on the egg. So I need a line all the way around it to tell me where the top of these I almost said fins, scales are supposed to hit. Just in case, these are a little bit off, I'm going to keep this the same each time, not relying on my last measurement. So I will find a good spot. So I'm going to line it up where I think my scale should go, right about there. That looks good for me. And I'm going to mark it. And then I'm going to transfer that mark all the way around. So if you can see, this is my last blue line. So up from there to there, I can just measure that distance and then transfer it all the way around. Or, to be more precise, I can measure from my center point all the way down, which is what I have been doing. But now that I'm so far around the egg, that won't work for this one. What I was doing before was using a compass, setting it in the center, and then just drawing the circle around from there. Because as you go down, if you don't go back to 0, your errors are gonna compound upon each other, and they're gonna get much worse. So it's always better to measure from 0, or have a 0 to measure from. But in this case, I don't really have that luxury. Once I get past this kind of center band, then I can start using the 0 from this side. So that'll be a lot easier. But for now, we're just gonna eyeball it and draw a line. Here I'm making the next row, so I start out by making a set of 4 scales all together, and then I take that and I trace it 3 more times for a total of 16. Makes it really fast and easy to get them all the same. As I'm coming to the top of the egg, I've run into a problem, and that's really art is fixing problems. As you run into the innovating around situations where you run into issues. So my issue is that the scales are going to run into each other and overlap more than I want them to. So my solution is to change the shape of the scale. So this is what the scale usually looks like. Fits my face pretty well. Hi guys. And this is my new shape. So all I've done is shave off. You can see that. Let me get closer. There we go. Switch it to manual focus. Okay. So let me line these up so you see. Well, you can't see. So I've just cut this little edge off so that when they're on, because these aren't glued on, so they're just kind of set there. So these ones have the little taper on the top, and then the top lines up really nice, and then it's proper spacing for everything. Should be like right there, right? So it works out. So as I'm going up, I'm going to continue to do that. Taper those tops in so we don't have a bunch of bunched up material. Also, a good thing is that now that we've passed this kind of center area, I can finally use the center up here with my compass and draw those circles again. So it makes laying everything out a lot easier to do that and to keep everything in line, because it's looking so nice so far. Anyway. Okay, so I'm getting to the point where cutting out each individual one is getting tedious and almost not feasible because they're just so tiny. So instead I did some layout, took some measurements off of my egg and did this layout. So this is the next row, so I'm just going to cut that out of leather and then come in a little bit, cut that circle out, and then just keep doing that, cutting out basically a bunch of flowers and stacking them on top of each other to finish it off as kind of a cap. Like that. So we got this flower and we need to do the next row. So I don't need to make a new template. All I have to do is draw the next row, just like right here. I'm starting to do it right here. So draw that in where it's supposed to go, and then cut these petals back and then trace it again. So I'll continue to do that as the petals or the scales get smaller and smaller, and somewhere in here I'll decide to stop because they're gonna get really, really tiny. But you just keep on going. Okay, so we're going to distress this a little bit, like that, with some isopropyl alcohol. Did I say that right? And a little brush. So just do this gently. We're just taking off the very top layer of dye that's on the layer. That's on the leather, not the layer. So you just brush it on, and scrub it in just a little bit. It doesn't take much to break up that dye, and it's better to do it slower than faster, like do it in stages. So scrub it on just like that. You see where I am? And then you wipe it off, and it takes that dye with it. And if it didn't do enough, then you just keep doing it again. Do it again, until you reach the desired look. Or you could just leave it as is. You don't have to do this distressing step, but I wanted to go ahead and give it a little bit more texture. So just take your time and do each scale. And it gives it a little bit more of a distressed look. A little bit more texture instead of just flat brown like that. Looks a little bit nicer, a little bit more copper, a little bit more contrast. So we're gonna do the whole thing like that and then take some beauty shots.
Damn. Yeah. Yeah.